Space had rules. Every species that reached the stars learned them early and learned them painfully. There was gravity, or the lack of it. There was pressure, or the sudden violence when it vanished. There was air, precious, fleeting, unforgiving. And above all, there was the vacuum. The void between worlds was not an environment, it was an absence, a place where biology failed, where flesh surrendered in seconds, and where even the bravest soldiers became fragile things wrapped in metal and seals. The Cathari Dominion had written these rules into doctrine. For nearly 4,000 cycles, the Cathari had ruled their spiral arm through disciplined fleets and immaculate strategy. They were tall, slender beings encased in layered exoskeletal armor. Their bodies evolved under crushing gravity and dense atmospheres. They were brilliant tacticians, methodical and patient, and they viewed war as an exercise in precision rather than passion. And they believed utterly that no living species could fight in open vacuum. Battles were fought ship to ship. Boarding actions required sealed corridors and pressurized environments. Any breach of hull integrity meant retreat, containment, or loss. Vacuum exposure was not a weapon, it was an execution. So when the first reports came in about humans, the Cathari commanders laughed. Humans were new, barely a few centuries past their first faster-than-light jump. A bipedal species from a mid-gravity world with fragile bodies, soft skin, and an emotional decision-making process that defied every military algorithm the Dominion possessed. They were inventive, yes, persistent, annoyingly adaptable, but they were still biological, and biology did not survive the void. The war began, as most wars did, over territory. A chain of mineral-rich systems at the edge of Cathari space, unclaimed by any treaty, quietly settled by human mining consortiums and civilian habitats. When the Dominion arrived to enforce what they considered historical boundaries, they expected compliance. They did not receive it. Instead, human diplomats spoke of shared access, mutual defense, and something called precedent. When negotiations stalled, the Cathari applied pressure, trade blockades, fleet posturing, a calculated display of overwhelming force. The humans responded by reinforcing their colonies and refusing to withdraw. The Dominion Council authorized limited military action. It would be brief, educational, and it would end the moment the humans learned their place.
Rising conflict. The limits of flesh. The first engagement took place near Hestia's Reach, a system dominated by a blue-white gas giant and its ring of debris. The Cathari Third Fleet emerged from hyperspace in flawless formation, ships aligned like polished blades against the stars. Human vessels were already there. They were inelegant. Blocky hulls, exposed framework, modular sections bolted onto larger structures like afterthoughts. Where Cathari ships curved and flowed, human ships looked assembled rather than grown, utilitarian, asymmetrical, and unapologetically ugly. The initial exchange was cautious, probing fire, sensor jamming, electronic warfare that crackled invisibly across light seconds of space. The Cathari held the advantage. They always did. Human ships maneuvered aggressively, closing distances that Dominion doctrine labeled reckless. They absorbed damage that should have crippled them, rerouting power, venting compartments, continuing forward even as hull plating peeled away. Still, it was within expectations. Humans were stubborn. That much had been documented. Then a human cruiser took a direct hit. Its starboard flank ruptured. A long, jagged tear opened along the hull, venting atmosphere and debris into space. The Cathari commander, Fleet Master Soreth, marked it as neutralized. But the human ship did not withdraw. Instead, something unexpected happened. Small craft detached from the damaged cruiser, not boarding pods, not drones, but something else. They were irregular shapes, angular and compact, propelled by short bursts of thrust. They moved toward the Cathari flagship. Fleetmaster Soreth frowned, his mandibles clicking softly in confusion. "Identify hostile craft," he ordered. Sensors struggled. The objects were small, cold, and difficult to classify. No power signatures consistent with drones. No life signs detectable through standard filters. "Possibly automated weapons," one of his aides suggested. "Prepare point defense," Soreth replied calmly. The Dominion's cannons tracked the incoming shapes. Fire lanced out, precise and lethal. Several of the objects vanished in brief flashes of light, but others kept coming. They reached the flagship's outer hull and attached themselves. Then they began to cut. Not with plasma torches or heavy breaching tools, with controlled charges and mechanical precision, slicing through armor seams, exploiting maintenance access points the Dominion had never considered vulnerable. Alarms sounded across the flagship, hull breaches, decompression warnings. The Cathari soldiers stationed near the breach points reacted instantly, sealing bulkheads, engaging emergency fields, moving to repel what they assumed were machines. When the inner hatch blew open, they were ready, and then they froze, because what came through the breach was not a machine, it was a human.
The ones who step outside. The Cathari had studied humans extensively. They had footage of their cities, their soldiers, their environments. They knew humans required oxygen, pressure, and narrow thermal ranges to survive. The being that emerged from the breach violated all of that knowledge. The human wore armor, yes, but not the kind the Cathari expected. It was bulky, layered, scarred from previous use. Its surface was covered in impact marks and hastily repaired fractures. A transparent visor revealed a face flushed with exertion, eyes wide and focused, breath fogging the inside of the helmet. There was no panic. The human moved with practiced efficiency, mag boots locking onto the deck, rifles snapping up as if the lack of gravity and atmosphere meant nothing at all. Behind the first came more, a squad, perhaps a dozen. They flowed into the compartment like a tide, weapons controlled, movements economical. Each one bore the marks of vacuum exposure, frosted armor joints, microfractures along seals, emergency heaters glowing faintly beneath plating. They were fighting in open space. Cathari soldiers hesitated, not because they lacked training, not because they feared death, but because everything they believed about reality told them this was impossible. Vacuum combat was not a tactic, it was a boundary, a hard limit imposed by physics and biology alike, and the humans had stepped beyond it. The first shots were fired by the humans. Kinetic rounds slammed into Cathari armor at close range, bypassing energy shields calibrated for ship-to-ship engagements. The confined space amplified every impact. Cathari soldiers fell, stunned or incapacitated, their movements sluggish as their internal pressure systems struggled to compensate for micro-breaches. The humans advanced, not recklessly, not with fury, with coordination. They communicated through short bursts, hand signals, helmet flashes, sub-vocal commands transmitted through tight beam comms. Every movement had purpose. Every shot conserved momentum and ammunition. They were not immune to the vacuum. They were enduring it. Fleetmaster Soreth watched the tactical feed in disbelief. Human boarding parties were appearing across multiple ships in the fleet, always targeting vessels that had suffered hull damage, always exploiting breaches that the Dominion considered catastrophic but contained. To the humans, those breaches were doorways. "What are they doing?" one of the aides whispered.
Soreth had no answer, but somewhere deep in his strategic mind, an uncomfortable realization began to form. These humans had not stumbled into vacuum combat. They had planned for it.
Rising conflict. Endurance as doctrine. The Cathari attempted to adapt. Orders were issued to withdraw from damaged ships, to maintain distance, to avoid close engagements where hull breaches were likely. Point defense systems were recalibrated. Internal compartments were flooded with containment fields. It slowed the humans. It did not stop them. Human ships deliberately exposed sections of their own hulls, venting atmosphere to create maneuvering opportunities. They used the vacuum as terrain, moving along ship exteriors, launching from debris fields, anchoring themselves to enemy vessels with grappling systems and sheer physical force. Cathari analysts struggled to keep up. Human exposure tolerance exceeds predictions, one report stated. That was an understatement. The truth was more unsettling. Humans were not surviving vacuum combat because they were stronger or more resilient in a biological sense. They were surviving because they had accepted it as a cost. Their armor was not perfect. Their seals failed. Their bodies suffered hypoxia, radiation exposure, decompression injuries. Medical telemetry captured elevated heart rates, oxygen deprivation, microvascular damage. And they kept going. Because human doctrine, something the Cathari had failed to understand, did not revolve around avoiding harm. It revolved around completing the mission. One Cathari ship, the Vathric Spear, attempted a desperate maneuver, venting its entire internal atmosphere to deny the humans access. The internal gravity was cut, temperatures plummeted. The humans inside did not retreat. They magnetized themselves to the deck and continued their advance through frozen corridors, breath limited, movement slowed but purposeful. They used chemical heaters to maintain weapon function, body heat to keep joints flexible. By the time Cathari reinforcements arrived, the ship's command core was under human control. The Dominion lost 3 ships in that engagement. It was meant to be a skirmish. It became a lesson. Human perspective. Why they fight. On board the human assault carrier Resolute, Sergeant Mara Ionescu removed her helmet and sat heavily against the bulkhead. Her hands shook as she checked the seals on her suit, fingers numb and clumsy. Across from her, a younger soldier, barely out of training, stared at her with wide eyes. They weren't ready for that," he said quietly. Mara let out a breath that was half laugh, half cough. "Most aren't," she replied. "That's the point." The young soldier hesitated. How do you stay calm out there?" Mara considered the question. She thought of Earth, of oceans and mountains, of generations of humans who had gone into places they were not meant to survive, deep seas, frozen poles, burning deserts, the vacuum of space. "We don't," she said finally. "We just don't let fear decide for us." She tapped the side of her helmet. "This keeps us alive long enough. The rest is stubbornness." The human military had not developed vacuum combat out of arrogance or bravado. It had come from necessity, from disasters where ships ruptured and survival depended on acting rather than freezing, from engineers who assumed things would fail and built systems that could limp onward anyway. Human suits were not elegant. They were layered with redundancies, manual overrides, and fail-safes that required conscious effort to manage. They demanded constant attention, constant adjustment. But they allowed choice. A human in vacuum was not safe, but they were not helpless. And that made all the difference.
Climax, the shift in perspective. The decisive battle occurred weeks later near the fractured remains of an ancient moon. The Cathari had regrouped, reinforced, and adapted as best they could. They had reinforced hulls, minimized exposure risks, and prepared countermeasures for human boarding actions. They believed they understood the humans now. They were wrong. When the fleets engaged, the humans did not immediately close distance. Instead, they targeted the environment. They fired controlled barrages into the moon's debris field, shattering rock and ice into clouds of particulate matter. The field became a storm, dense, unpredictable, lethal to sensors and shields alike. The Cathari formations faltered. Human ships plunged into the chaos. Explosions tore through hulls on both sides. Vacuums swallowed light and sound. Wreckage spun silently through the void. And then the humans emerged, everywhere. From behind fragments of moon, from the shadows of shattered ships, from places no one expected them to survive. Cathari soldiers found themselves facing humans, clinging to hull plating with one hand while firing with the other. Humans who used their own momentum as weapons, slamming into enemy positions with bone-shaking force. One Cathari officer, Commander Threx, found himself face-to-face with a human who had lost part of their suit's external plating. Frost clung to exposed material. Warning lights flashed red across the human's visor. They should have been dead. Instead, the human raised a hand, not in surrender, but in a brief, almost apologetic gesture, before striking with a stun charge that sent Threx sprawling. As he lay there, systems failing, Commander Threx realized something profound. The humans were not immune to the vacuum. They were choosing to fight anyway. That choice, made again and again by individuals who knew the cost, was something the Cathari had never planned for, because it could not be quantified, it could not be predicted, and it could not be stopped by superior firepower alone.
Resolution, the meaning of endurance. The war ended not with total victory, but with understanding. The Cathari withdrew from the contested systems. Treaties were signed, borders redrawn. Official statements spoke of mutual respect and strategic reevaluation. But among the Dominion's military academies, a new lesson was added to the curriculum. It was simple. Do not assume limits define humans, because humans treat limits as challenges. Fleetmaster Soreth, now retired, recorded his final reflections for the Dominion archives. "We believed survival defined warfare," he said, "that a soldier's first duty was to remain alive. Humans taught us otherwise." He paused, mandibles clicking softly. "They showed us that sometimes the willingness to endure what should not be survivable is the greatest weapon of all." Across human space, the battle became a story told and retold, not as a tale of conquest, but of perseverance, of ordinary people who stepped into an environment that rejected them and refused to stop. Not because they were fearless, but because they believed the fight mattered. And for the first time, the galaxy understood what it truly meant to be human. If this story moved you, subscribe for more human stories from the stars.